You are listening to the Body Charge podcast, and I'm your host, Sandy Sanderson. Welcome to the Body Charge podcast. Today's topic is how to get free of restrictions and fly with the eagles. If you're feeling as if it seems like there is no way out of circumstances, you may be surprised to find out there's always another way forward, but you had a blind eye to it. And why is that goal sometimes so elusive? The stress of holding a seemingly impassable position without release can severely impact our health. My special guest today can help to unravel those mental blocks. Dr. Peter Economou is Assistant Professor for the Department of Applied Psychology and the Director of Behavioural Health and Wellness for Rutgers University Athletics. Dr. Pete is a certified mental performance consultant through the Association of Applied Sport Psychology. So welcome aboard, Dr. Pete. Really glad to have you, especially since we've commenced the Olympic Games.
Yes, I'm happy to be here. I always say every 4 years it was cool to be a swimmer. So I was a former swimmer competing at the highest level, and it was only every fourth year that I was not made fun of for wearing a Speedo. So it's a super exciting time for me as a swimmer.
Yes, it is. And for Australia too. I think Australia and the
Yes.
USA are seemingly always neck and neck with a
Yeah,
fingernail difference.
we have a rivalry.
Isn't it amazing how the technology has come so far where they can measure it to 200th of a second difference? That is just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the technology is also showing how fast they're swimming, which is pretty cool. That's new.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
and I've been watching some of the interviews, and they talk about the roller coaster ride of emotions. So,
Yes.
so the mental state of an athlete and their emotional state highly impacts their performance level,
Yes.
and their stress levels, and can they give it their best shot? Because they prepare for such a long time. They
Yeah.
know what they can do when they're practicing. But then something different might happen in the actual arena with all the crowds there when the test is on. So it reminds me of when I was a teenager. I prepared well, I did my assignments, I got top marks, but when it came to tests, my mind went blank. So what is it? What is this mechanism that causes us to freeze with high levels of stress?
Well, it's the beautiful nervous system, the central nervous system. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of neurons that run all over our body. And so many people have heard of fight or flight or deer in headlights. And so that's the autonomic nervous system that's just activating to keep us alive. I think in Western culture, we've looked at this as like an anxiety epidemic or things of that nature. But it's evolution. It's what keeps us, safe. So, for listeners, like if you like animals and there's 3 saber-toothed tigers out your front door, you don't want to go out and pet them straight away. You want to feel a little bit of anxiety. And so,
Caution.
Yeah, caution. Exactly. Yeah. And so, but I think also you mentioned about the Olympics and unraveling like all the, what people put into this. And we put a lot. I mean, there's so much sacrifice that as fans, we don't really understand the amount of sacrifice that every one of our athletes has made to get to that point. And like you said in the introduction to this, is like they can do all that. You don't know what's going to happen on race day. One of the big headlines here in the US was, Simone Biles having a calf injury, and some people were really judging that. And was she going to compete or was she going to back out again? Like really judging her. I mean, this is one of our, kind of best gymnasts of today's era. And no matter what she does, there's always going to be somebody criticizing her for something.
Yeah, so I guess they have to have a pretty thick skin, don't they?
You sure do. Yeah. And that's resilience. That's, you can learn resilience, you can build resilience, you can train resilience. And certainly high performers at that level we do have tougher skin. We absolutely do.
Yes, so as a sports psychologist, you really have to get involved with the people you're helping, because mind plays a big part in, excelling, getting the body to do something that it hasn't done before that well.
Yes.
Jumped that high before, swam that fast before. So and people get a bit of a ceiling mentally, don't they? They like get so far, and then there's like a line they can't get over. So who draws that line, and how do we get past it?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think some of the lines are there because of just, biology. I'm not going to jump as high, as Stefan Curry or, some of these other sort of, big basketball players, whatever. Like we all have limitations. But there is research that shows that our brain creates some limitations. And so it is helpful from a mental skills perspective to try and, evaluate those lines and then try and deconstruct them. And so you asked how. I mean, one of the first things you do is, can you envision whatever your goal is? And it doesn't have to be just about Olympic sports. It could be becoming a, manager in your office. It could be getting married. So sometimes people will, if they say to me something like, I want X, Y, or Z, and I'll say, well, what does X, Y, and Z look like? And then I'll watch sort of, they might not know. And so you can't, you can't achieve something if you can't see it. And that's not, yeah.
It comes down to passion, doesn't it? If you visualize something and you feel it, so your subconscious doesn't really know the difference between real and not real. So if you keep this video of the mind moving forward, playing out what you would like to happen, the emotions then go with it. And is it the emotions that give us the power to actually push forward further? Is that the key?
Oh, I think if we can constructively use the emotions, there's 6 basic emotions, if anyone's watched Inside Out or some of these other movies out there. And so we all have those, whether I am, Michael Phelps, or whether I'm like my favorite athlete that I know, or, a mail carrier in my community. And so can I use those emotions effectively? And that's what's really the beauty of what I do as a sports psychologist, is help people use those emotions. But to be clear, I'm not saying like just envision, there is subconscious, unconscious, all the things you mentioned. So if I just envision, $15 million in my bank account, like I don't wake up and I can withdraw from that. Like it takes a lot of work to get whatever this vision is.
But I noticed that they do use a lot of psychological techniques, such as when they interviewed a swimmer, she said, well, her father who had passed over, she felt was with her in the pool swimming, driving her forward. So she's played this reel. She's picked up on that emotion, which is obviously a great sense of love. And this provided her with the fuel or the extra that she needed to just push further.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
it's a strategy, isn't it? Psychological strategy all the time, trying to find out where people's hotspots are that's going to pick up the strongest level of emotion to give them that extra power.
A superpower maybe.
Superpower.
It's motivation theory, and so there are a lot of diverse aspects of the human experience that motivate people differently. So in a very basic way, there's intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So things like money or gold medals are extrinsic. Internal is like just making my dad proud. And so, it all that stuff kind of motivates us in a different way. The other thing about like the example you gave is that sometimes that creates grit, and I don't know if it's like I've talked about this on my podcast, where grit is sort of like a very much New Jersey, New York term. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's
Like a dog
universal.
with a bone, right?
Like a dog with a bone. Yeah. And so sometimes that's what these things create. So if I have a chip on my shoulder or grit, it might be because of some dark side of my experience that kind of led to that.
So there are several psychological techniques. So tapping into that emotion of love for someone is one. Another, I've noticed the competitive edge, where they tag someone and that's their primary goal, is to get past that one, or they become a leader or push each other further. It's this
Yeah.
competitive streak that also is a big driver.
Yeah. Yeah, and some people are more competitive than others, and um, and again, I think sometimes when we break that down as a sports psychologist, that competition might be because of, some sibling rivalry or some way that they were raised, or, maybe some other marginalized identity they possess. So we talk a lot, in the US about like multicultural competence, thinking about how culturally the context in which people exist. And so sometimes some of those cultural experiences might contribute to some of that sort of drive to like surpass everybody else, leave them in the dust.
Yes, yes, a bit of an ego trip, isn't it? Big
Yeah,
dopamine
it could.
hit.
It certainly could be. I think as a psychologist, when we talk about ego, sometimes that could be unhealthy.
Mhm.
It could be like narcissistic or things of that nature. And a lot of high performers have some kind of sprinkling of narcissism, so it's not a bad word in my world. Um, it's only bad when it interferes with my relationships.
Well, when you're performing at an elite level, you're not obviously the same as everyone else. And it
That's right.
sometimes gets lonely at the top. So they have to feel comfortable with being different, having a different
Yeah.
lifestyle, practicing and swimming or competing or going to the gym every day. I mean, the whole life is so dedicated, like
Yeah.
almost like a monk.
Yeah. Yeah. It is almost like a monk. Yeah. I think that's a really good way to think about it. It's that level of sacrifice, that's for sure.
Yes, so getting back to how we can translate that mindset of achieving goals and getting better, improving upon your own record, breaking your own records. How can we translate that for the average everyday person who doesn't have the same kind of lifestyle and dedication and is on a completely different treadmill? But
Hmm.
they're still trying to achieve goals that they set, but they have these same kind of ceilings, same
Mhm.
kind of mental blocks. And you mentioned before, it can be related to their upbringing and childhood experiences with siblings. And maybe
Mhm.
they were the youngest ones and the older one kept dominating everything. And the younger one feels like a bigger push now to get ahead, and they may become extreme
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah.
So when you go into a person's background, I guess you have
Mhm.
to dig quite deeply to find out where the weak links in the chain are
Yeah.
to then strengthen them up and I guess achieve a sense of balance, because we have to find that balance so that the stress or the impasse of a certain position or a fixation doesn't get the better of us and then affects our physical health. Um,
Yes.
People can refuse to just let go of something, let go of an issue,
Yeah.
and it drives them downwards. It actually impacts their health. So how do we achieve balance between the goals, how we want to get there, and also achieve wellness at the same time, so we don't become obsessive
Yeah.
or get addicted even to the I guess the adrenaline, the high risk activity, whatever it is we're doing to do better.
Yeah.
How do we get the balance so that it doesn't get the better of us?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the first part about like, what about like these non sort of general people that are not high performing, like seeking a gold medal? I mean, I think all of us should have goals that are SMART, is the acronym. So specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. That's the acronym. So, goals are really healthy for all of us. So no matter what my career is, just think about what do you want to, gain specifically, maybe, 1 year, 5 year, 10 year. That's why it's, what is it? It's measurable. And it's attainable. Again, I don't want to start with like, if I have $0 in the bank, I don't want to think my goal is 15 million. I got to start somewhere. Realistic and time bound. Balance is key. So I love that you brought that up. In the world of mindfulness, we talk about middle path. And so the middle path is like that gray area. A lot of us see the world as black and white. And if you're practicing any kind of like mindfulness meditation, you realize that nothing is black and white. There's a lot of chanting and mantras around that. There's no the relative of absolute. And so that's something that's really beautiful because you don't then get addicted to it. You recognize that there's always some kind of fluidity around what it is that you're achieving. And if I'm going to think about an addiction, an addiction to wellness is probably the best addiction to have.
Yeah.
I know I think, you talked about sort of obsession and in an obsessional way. And sometimes to obsess about something like that can be helpful, again, like, and sometimes high performers that I work with, like they do have obsessive type brains. And so we're not going to get rid of that, like we're going to have to work with it.
It's useful in the test and the challenge stage, isn't it?
Sure.
But then they have to come back and they have to rest and recover. And
Yeah.
it's the rest and recovery phase that dictates how we detox and how we regather the strength and rebuild the muscle and rebuild the body and come back even stronger.
Yeah.
So that leads me into a little mention about magnesium, because Elektra Magnesium produce a range of products that one can absorb through the skin that
Wonderful.
help the nervous system relax and recover and rebuild, which is really important because when you're under high stress, your digestive system is not necessarily working at its best. So you may not be able to get the best out of the food, even if you think you're eating a fresh, healthy food diet. It may not be getting into the cells where it's needed, but through the skin, the body can bypass that system. So that's working quite well with a lot of athletes that we work with, that rest and recovery phase, and the strengthening of the body ready for the next event. So important. Especially also if they've had an injury, there's maybe some swelling. Magnesium helps speed up the healing process as well. So it's very important for people to be mindful of that balance and that recovery phase. And
Yes.
so that leads me into also the enjoyment of what you do. I think when you mention goal setting, how do we set the right goals and not the goals that we think someone else might expect us to have, or just copying someone else's goals, because we really haven't dug deep into ourselves enough to work out what we should do. And so the guiding post, I think, is the element of fun. So how much do you like to do whatever it is that goal is made up of? Because you're not going to do well at something you don't like, right?
Yeah, you mentioned one of my titles is a professor, and so I work with a lot of graduate students, and some of them come and they're like, "Well, research is boring," and I say, "Well, research is boring if you're not interested in the topic. Research could be less boring and maybe even exciting if you enjoy the topic." And so I think that that's like a very important thing to think about. And it's also what you mentioned in terms of goals for people that are listening is just values based. And what that means is, for example, if family is a really important thing, then I might want to set some goals around my family. I want to spend one day a week with no devices and just my family hanging out,
A lot of
or
people wouldn't know what
if the
that feels
environment.
like.
Yeah, that's
World
right.
today, isn't it? It pulls you sideways. There's
It does.
always something on the screen. It's very
Yes.
distracting these days. I'm 65. I know the difference between the world before and the world now. It's a big difference.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, some of the athletes I work with don't recognize that, we didn't always have cell phones and the internet and Wi-Fi was not always accessible. And yeah, it's a much different world.
It is, and we have to be mindful of staying to be the boss of our world and our life, and not letting devices or technology rule us. So the tail wagging the dog, in other
Yes.
words,
Yes.
which is easy to do. If you're not mindful, you can just slide into that what's next on the screen, right? And that's the end of your goals, because all those
That's it.
distractions aren't going to get you over the line.
They're not going to get you over the line. And so the way I think about it is I need to use it rather than it using me.
Yes. Yes. Very well said. It.
Whatever the it is.
It's
It's
AI,
yeah,
etc. Yeah.
AI, etc. Yes, yes. It really, it's an amazing invention, and so I don't always judge it in a really harsh way.
Yes.
It's just that I need to really make sure that I'm using it effectively because these apps and the devices have been made for us to use them more. So guess what? They're working.
It's a
They're
tool.
working.
It's a tool,
That's right.
and we need to
Yeah.
learn how to use that tool better.
Yes.
Um, and our body is a tool. And so coming back to the athletic side of things, we we learn through practice and discipline how
Mhm.
to use that tool, that body tool, in the best way possible, how to
Yes.
maintain it, how to recover better. So it's a learning process, isn't it? So
It is.
technologies for us is very relatively new. And we're not necessarily taught. It just sort of appears and there's something new and it just takes off. But
Yeah.
but we're not taught how to bring in the reins. We're not taught how to get back on the horse, back onto our zone, our goal, our pathway, and how to use that technology to make our goals achieved.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
so so this is very interesting because so much depends on mindset, doesn't it? And
Oh yeah.
and the ability to change and be flexible and to
Yeah.
know that you are in the end the one in control and the one who is responsible.
Yes.
And you can't
Yeah.
blame it on anyone else.
No, I mean you can, because there's no rules against it, and many people do. But I think healthy people, especially like leaders, for example, they look at themselves. You have to introspect and say, what was my role in this? And I think healthy people will work towards owning it, and sometimes over owning it. Depending on their leadership style.
Which then causes more stress. So then we come
Yes,
back to balance again. And that
that's right.
introspection helps us to um, evaluate and weigh up all the pros and the cons and to see things from a different perspective. And it is about perspective because we look through these two eyes from one
Yes.
perspective. So how we are going to know what someone else is seeing the same thing as unless we stand back and we take a
Hmm.
pause and we imagine what that
Hmm.
person would be seeing. And so that
Yes.
comes down to mindfulness again, doesn't it? And take taking the it was sitting the ego in a corner and telling it to behave
I like
like
that. Yeah.
like a dog. You sit
Yes.
there, you serve me, ego,
Yes.
not the other
I
way
love that.
around.
That's right. I love that. Yeah. Yeah.
So
I say a lot in on our podcast, we say all roads lead to mindfulness.
they do, don't they? They do.
Yeah.
I think that's the learning curve and probably the reason that we're here doing what we're doing and all our
Yes.
activities. I feel in my inner core, there's purpose to everything. There's a
Yes.
reason that we are here. Every single individual on the planet has their
Hmm.
purpose. They are completely unique. They're not like anyone else.
I
There may
know.
be similarities, but we are who we are as individuals. And the learning curve is to learn actually who we are and
Hmm.
understand that, and therefore become a better manager of the tool, which is our body in our daily
Yes.
activities. And
Yes.
then once you get to that stage, it's much easier to achieve and manifest the goals and take them from an idea and make them a reality because
Yes.
we become responsible and in charge of ourselves.
Yes.
I think that's the
Yes.
ultimate goal.
Hopefully, I think evolution and self-awareness kind of lead to that, hopefully. And again, a practice of mindfulness can also help with that. You mentioned flexibility earlier. That's what mindfulness and meditation can do to the brain, and that's also involved in rest and recovery, as you mentioned, which I love that you talked about, because it's also important. And I would imagine, I start with the athletes I work with, the day they're injured, we're working with them, because that's
Yes.
when recovery starts. So even if they have surgery, for a severe injury, we are right in there because mindset really impacts the prognosis.
I think you can tell with the athletes as the camera zooms in and they're about to kick that deciding goal, they summon all their concentration. You can see them like going within. It's a Zen state, isn't it? The
Yes.
Zen
Yeah.
of I'm imagining that ball going into the hoop or the goal. They're seeing it going in there just before, and then they let their body carry it out
Yeah.
in its own wisdom. That's
Yeah.
the Zen of it, the Zen of getting the ball in the hole, right?
Yeah, it's historically is also called the flow, flow state. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's any athlete or any listener that's kind of been in that zone will know what we're talking about.
Yes, it's lovely to watch though. I think it's a good example for others to, whatever you have to do, whatever challenge is in front of you,
Yeah.
you might be addressing an audience, doing a speech, some kind of thing that makes you nervous, and you have to gather all of your senses and your strengths and abilities together
Yeah.
and show and perform. And
Yeah.
it's a bit like just before a podcast. We we have to gather everything together. We have all the prep, um, organize it in a way which is understandable, have a discussion, and hopefully get a great message out there to people.
That's right. Well, I think you've done a good job with yours. That's for sure.
Oh, thank you. So people will probably want to know more about what you do, or can they read something about what you've written? Where can they connect
Yeah.
with you?
Yeah, all the official Dr. Pete on all of the socials. The podcast is When East Meets West. And I have a few books, so you look up my last name, but the mindfulness workbook for beginners.
Wow, that's a great start. I think I think this should be taught in schools at a very young age,
Yes.
mindfulness, kindergarten even. Come in and sit down
Yes,
and be quiet and do some deep breathing exercises. Focus on the breath going in and out, something really simple. Kids can do that. And they're
they
usually
can.
quite open. We got to start early.
We do. I agree. I agree with you very much so.
Well, lovely to chat with you, and you have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Sandy.
I hope you liked this conversation and will share it with others. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. If you want to listen to other Body Charge conversations, click like, subscribe, the bell icon, and click all notifications. Subscribe to our newsletter to get updates on blogs, podcasts, videos, and magnesium special offers at electramagnesium.com.au. Relax, recharge, and recover.